The Echo Chamber, brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by the international broadcast specialist Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Echo Chamber. I'm Maja Pawinska-Sims, the EMEA editor of the Holmes Report, and I'm joined in London today by the boss, Arun Sudhaman, who's on the same continent as me for a change, which is wonderful. And also we've got in the studio David Tiltman, VP of Content at WARC, a marketing intelligence service, which is a sister brand to the Cannes Lion. And we're going to talk about all things Cannes and beyond today. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
You don't have to refer to me as the boss. I feel that raises expectations of what I might talk about. David, it's great to have you on. It's been a while since you were last on this podcast.
It has. I have fond memories of the last time.
Yeah, I think you were talking about the most effective campaigns. It was like a WARC ranking.
Yeah, they still exist.
They do.
Bigger and better than ever.
Okay, great. Well, a good time to get a plug in. So Maja, what are we going to discuss today?
I'm going to ask David how Cannes went for you this year. Have you survived re-entry from Planet Cannes successfully?
So far, yes. I'm still working my way through my notes, but so we'll see what delights those hold. But yeah, it was a really good Cannes for us. So as you say, we're a sister brand to Cannes Lion. This is the first time we've been to Cannes since WARC was acquired last year by Essential Group, which is, as you may know, Cannes Lion's owner. And so I think what that allowed us to do was just play on a much bigger stage. So we had a day of sessions in the Palais on the Wednesday on all things strategy and effectiveness. That went really well. And we actually used the Cannes platform to launch a white paper called The Anatomy of Effectiveness, which ran through a lot of the current thinking around effectiveness in marketing.
That sounds very grown up. Talk us through that.
It is quite grown up, yes. So I think what we wanted to do was use Cannes as a platform to talk about effectiveness a lot more. Obviously, Cannes traditionally is a festival of creativity, and creativity is still absolutely at its core, but with so many brands there now, we are having a lot of conversations about how you pull that creativity into the service of the business and actually drive business impact and long-term brand health. Mm-hmm. So what we did was to, WARC has an absolutely enormous database of case studies and research and thinking around how to advertise effectively. And we thought,
and how to communicate effectively.
And how to communicate effectively, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sabre case studies.
Including the amazing Sabre Awards.
Yeah.
What we did was we thought we would try and boil all of that down into a number of kind of key considerations for brands who want to communicate effectively. I'm happy to run you through those if you would like to.
Did you say you had 5 points you've come up with?
5, yeah, 5. And really these are just kind of starting points. None of these are kind of easy things. It's not as trite as, 5 ways to be effective. These are kind of 5 starting points.
No, because that'd be a blog post rather than a one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this runs for slightly longer than a blog post.
It was a Medium post.
It was several Medium posts.
Okay, sorry.
So the first one is simply about our investing for growth. Are you investing enough? We went through a period a few years ago where lots of people got very excited because they thought they could reduce money on paid media because they could get it all through earned media.
Fools.
Yes. And actually they found that they couldn't. And so there is still a lot of evidence that investment in paid media is key, and that you need to kind of benchmark your investment in terms of share of voice against your share of market. And there is this principle called excess share of voice, where is if you are spending a higher percentage in terms of share of voice on your marketing, then your share of market So if you have a 5% share market and you're spending, but you've got 10% share of voice, then you will grow. So there is a long-standing relationship there.
Okay.
Now, one of the things we do in the white paper is look at the way that's being challenged. So a lot of people now thinking, well, share of voice only really refers to paid media. Is there some kind of measure of share of experience or a broader kind of way of getting a view on your presence within a market, within your category? That can replace this kind of share of voice calculation. But so far, no one's actually found one yet. So we're still benchmarking it in share of voice. So that's the first principle. The second principle is around balancing your spend, and this is between long-term and short-term, or brand building and performance. There are a number of ways to describe it. There's lots in the advertising world. There's lots of work being done on this by people like Les Binet and Peter Field, who do a lot of research for the Institute for Practitioners in Advertising. And what they've done is really put the focus back onto brand. So we've had several years where people have chased down the kind of tech rabbit hole. They're doing lots of short-term campaigns, lots of campaigns that drive very immediate uplifts in sales, but that aren't building the brand for the long term. Those sales effects decay very quickly. But what you're not seeing is the kind of lasting impact on the brand. And we talk a little bit about this and how there is this supposedly a kind of 60-40 rule where you're supposed to spend about 60% of your budget in brand rather than in activation. That's not a hard and fast rule. That can vary by context. It can vary by brand. We've got a case study from IKEA where they spent 90% of their budget on brand. But what it's doing is forcing a lot of the advertisers to start realising or recognising that they're underspending on their brand. And I've had a lot of conversations in Cannes and in other areas with clients who want to get back into brand and want to understand, is that just sticking money on TV, or are there other ways we can be investing, particularly for brands with younger?
I heard somebody at
audience.
Cannes last week say that because of the rise of digital and social and the prominence of those kind of short-term campaigns, that it needs to be more like 70-30 these days rather than 60-40.
In favour of brand?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there is an argument that companies that have gone so far down the activation or the promotional rabbit warren probably need to overspend on brand to get out of it. I've heard that argument too, and I've heard Les Binet and Peter Field argue that in certain contexts, it could be 70-80 plus.
But do you see that balance reverting? Because presumably at the moment there's kind of been an infatuation with activation and tactical campaigns because of the rise of digital channels. I mean, do you actually see it perhaps shifting back towards brand?
Yeah, I actually do. I mean, the conversations I've been having with advertisers are about that. So we work a lot. A lot of our clients are our clients. They're a lot of the people who subscribe to WARC, and they come to us with specific challenges or problems, and a lot of the work we're doing now with all sorts of different brands is around helping them understand what this theory means for them. They've all kind of read the headlines, but they want to kind of get into the theory a bit more. So we work with them, and obviously we work closely with people like Les Binet and Peter Field, or the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, who do a lot of work around this.
So what's the third principle in the white paper?
The third one is around creativity. Obviously, there's a lot of, which is a good message in Cannes, obviously. There's a lot of evidence that creative marketing, particularly marketing that drives an emotional response, is just more effective than other types of advertising. There's a good P&G study we covered a few years ago where they tested a whole bunch of their advertising, and they found that the ones that drove a positive emotional response were 8 times more impactful. I can't remember exactly how they defined it, but 8 times more impactful than ones that didn't drive any emotional response. And even campaigns that drove a negative emotional response, things like disgust or fear, were twice as effective as campaigns that And there's this whole argument that actually the enemy isn't a kind of the enemy isn't antagonism, it's indifference.
Apathy.
Yeah. And we're seeing a lot of interest in this idea that that actually the worst thing you can do is just leave people apathetic or indifferent.
So when you talk about emotional response, that could be anything from humour to a
Purpose.
deeply
Well, I'm sure we'll talk about
Oh my goodness.
Or
Do we have
could
to
be
talk about purpose?
sadness. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of emotions, and people like System 1 or
Something
Millward
that
Brown.
touches, anything that touches.
Yeah,
you in
it's
some way.
it's yes, it is exactly. It's so surprise, humor, as you say,
Anger.
and it could be anger. It could be sadness in a kind of positive way. We've all seen the John Lewis make them cry, make them buy approach. So there's an emotional thing. There's also distinctiveness is also important. So, and this is something that a lot of brands kind of lose sight on when they're focusing on finding a differentiated space in the market. It's about actually, there's a lot of academic literature that puts the emphasis on distinctiveness rather than differentiation. And what that means is, you're in a kind of classic brand textbook, you might be differentiated as the low price brand for under 35s living in cities, whereas distinctiveness is, we're the red one, or we're the orange one, or we're the one with a funny logo,
Okay.
or we're the one with the duck.
Yeah.
It's about that, because those things are what drive memory, and memory is key. Emotional response drives memory encoding, and memory is key.
Yeah. That's really interesting. The duck as well.
Yeah, it could be a duck or a meerkat, or I mean, in fact, I know this is a very UK example, but price comparison websites are fascinating for this, because you think about it, it's one of the most boring sectors you can possibly imagine. Apologies to any price comparison website marketers listening to this, so what they've done is try and find as many ways to be distinctive as possible, whether it's a meerkat or an opera singer or something else.
Or both. In fact.
Or both, yeah.
What about point 4?
Point 4 is about media. So this is about planning for reach. So there's lots of evidence that certainly at a brand building level, you just want to be reaching as many people as possible. I know that sounds obvious, but we went through this phase where we all got obsessed with targeting and cutting out waste, and then actually what we've realised over time is there's a lot of value in the waste. If you define wasting as people who aren't in the market right now, they might be in the market next year or in 6 months, or it's like why would a nappy or diaper brand advertise mass market when it could just advertise to new parents? Well, because when you become a new parent, you want a brand you can trust.
Yeah.
And also, you're only in the market for nappies for a few months, and then there's a whole load of other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Remember it
So is
well.
that like back to more of a classical definition of reach, or
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. The challenge these days, obviously, is it's hard. You can still buy reach, but you have to spread your money over more channels, which it often increases frequency. And if you look, so Mark Pritchard made some P&G made some interesting comments in Cannes where he was talking about they want to find ways to cut down frequency, which means people see their ads less often and reinvest the money in reach so that more people are seeing them. And that's a tricky bat. It's really hard to do in the kind of modern fragmented media landscape.
So those enormous reach numbers of billions at the end of every Cannes Lion entry video, it matters, does it?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's obviously impressions. I mean, the thing with reach is, again, the more people look at it, not all reach is created equal. And so one of the things we talk about in the white paper is yes, we're trying to get people to think about reach, but the quality of reach is also important. Right. So context is important in that. What environment are you appearing in? Is it a lean back or a lean forward medium? And attention, there's how likely is this stuff to be seen? How likely are you to get attention in that channel? So reach is the kind of starting point, but there's kind of qualitative things that are being put around that.
So those impression numbers at the end of the videos are in fact meaningless.
Yes. Well, yes.
I'm happy
you talk to any judge, and then they don't. They're
especially if they're followed by advertising value equivalency. In the PR.
Surely nobody's still mentioning AVEs.
They're in so many of the Cannes PR lines.
But they actually
films.
They rule it out that's one thing you're not meant to mention in the written entry.
I've seen them in so many videos.
Sneaking them in.
I've seen them in so many. I'm sure you have as well.
Yeah, they definitely still exist.
Yeah. Which brings us to the final point in your white paper, number 5, David.
So the final one is about planning for recognition, and this goes back to what we're talking about distinctiveness, about memory structures. The whole shift towards short form in the last few years, you think, everyone's talking about branding in 6 seconds and all that kind of thing. It's made everyone actually focus on what is actually quite a long-standing advertising principle, but we all kind of forgot it when we had 30 seconds to play with, which is that if you only have very short spells of people's attention, people may only be glancing at you, and that's not going to happen very often. How do you actually get them to put the message in the ad along with your brand in their heads? Yeah. How are you driving the memory that, if you're the red one, that you're whatever
what do you stand for? What is it?
Yeah, what is it? So there's a number of different kind of theoretical underpinnings to this. So there's a very influential group in Australia called the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, and they talk about distinctive brand assets. So that might be your logos, your colours. I mentioned the red one earlier, but colour is very important. Sound is very important, particularly in a audio world. Yeah. What are your assets, and how can you use them in very kind of short bursts of attention?
There's a lot of psychology and behavioural science to this theory, isn't there? It feels like this is going a lot deeper than we've been before in understanding how consumers are relating to brands.
Deeper than for this podcast, you mean?
Deeper than ever for this podcast.
It's not the kind of superficial conversation we're used to.
Well, I'm glad to bring really. So there's a lot of obviously behavioural stuff. Neuroscience underpins a lot of this as well. So I think, when we talk distinctive brand assets isn't necessarily a new thing. It's been around for a while. It dovetails with what a company called System 1 in the UK do, which is they look at things called fluent devices, which is like a posh way of saying things like the meerkat, where you see that device and you know it wherever it is, whether it's in the TV ad or whether it's on a poster or whether it's on your phone. So their argument, their evidence suggests that the ads that have these devices in are significantly more effective than ads that don't have them in. Mm-hmm. And then if you go into the neuroscience, you've got people like NeuroInsight who talk about memory encoding and the way advertising, or indeed any sort of form of experience, so that could be PR as well, can drive memory and how you associate those memories with a specific brand. So there's lots going on in that area. It's an area there was a lot of interest because, as I say, we've got this rise of short form and this expansion of the kind of media palette. But it's a very interesting area. And I think one of the interesting things for me is that a lot of the evidence that's emerging there it almost supports the sort of advertising that people used to do. So jingles, we can all name our favourite jingles. nobody does jingles anymore. Yeah. Although maybe the rise of sonic branding is a return to that.
That's a fluent device.
Yeah,
jingle,
and I mean, we can all remember the jingles from our childhood, and they're ingrained in our memory. So people don't use jingles anymore, but there's lots of evidence that whether you call it sonic branding, whether you call it a fluent device, that sort of stuff does actually work.
Okay, but this is just more than just kind of recall and consideration. These things all actually drive actual effectiveness. So in terms of how do you, are you kind of looping from the actual advertising, I guess, to the evaluation or to the measurement?
So I mean, there's lots of kind of examples in the report. We put lots of case studies in. I think where I mean, one of the most popular ways to describe it is to have mental and physical availability, and that's an Ehrenberg Bass Institute thing. So when you come into a category, whether you're stood in front of a shelf or browsing a price comparison website or something else, what does that brand come to mind, and is it associated with that category? People tend to buy, according to the theory, people tend to buy in repertoires. So, for example, Coke buyers also buy Pepsi. Or possibly Fanta. Or
I just read that the other day. 70% of all Pepsi buyers buy Coke.
Yeah, I saw that too.
So you'll have a repertoire of brands, and when you get to the shelf, it might be which one stands out more, or which one's on price promotion, or which one. But it's about being in that set and having those kind of memory structures help you get into the consideration set. And there's lots of kind of long run evidence over many years that back this up. The people who take this really seriously are Mars. I mean, Mars absolutely follow this stuff to the letter. They've been on top of marketing science for many years.
Right.
And you look at something like the Snickers. You know where you're not you when you're hungry. That is an absolute classic of a campaign that ticks all these five boxes. It's distinctive. It's on brand. They just keep going with it, so it drives the kind of recognition. It's planned across many channels. They have a mass reach approach, but they balance that with very smart activations. They had this thing called Hunger Rhythm in Australia a couple of years ago that was very, very intelligent, and it just ticks all these boxes. So there are advertisers like that really know how to do this stuff. It's not easy to do. They know how to do it, and they're very successful at it. I think what we wanted to do with the white paper is look at some of the areas where it's being challenged as well. So to say that there is a kind of model here, but in each area there's new thinking, new ideas, new approaches. Because a lot of the evidence is still comes out of FMCG, packaged goods, and there's lots of new types of brand emerging.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I heard at Cannes, and it's not a new observation, but the rise of, I don't know how you refer to it, but kind of unbranded products or the popularity of non-brands, if that's a phrase, amongst younger consumers. And I heard this last week. And I wonder, because everything you've detailed really, I think, reinforces the case for brands and brand equity. So do you think that's a real thing? Is that something that you've considered?
The non-brand brand?
Yeah.
Well, it's just a different type of brand.
Different type of brand. But is it? Or is it just a sort of, I don't know, a more commoditized view of
I don't know. I mean, with anything like that, and we have looked at things like direct-to-consumer brands. Because there is arguably a new model of building a brand from scratch, and we're seeing lots of interesting small brands get to a relatively large size on what you might call a non-traditional marketing model. Now, I guess the kind of rules that we've set out are more from a marketing approach that starts with a big brand and how do you eke out extra growth. And there is a lot of interesting analysis being done on smaller brands and how they get to where they get to. Now, the thing with these brands is they reach a point where they run out of the kind of people who will respond naturally to an unbranded brand, for example, or to a mobile beer delivery service or whatever it is. And it's at this point where you kind of get from the small niche brand, and you want to keep growing into a larger brand, that we start to see them move from this a model that is very focused on performance marketing, cost per acquisition, that sort of thing, into a more of a brand model. And you see this. So there's data we include in the report where the amount spent by direct-to-consumer brands in the US on TV has gone up hugely, like several 100% in the last few years, because these brands are reaching the point where they need to invest in a mass market proposition.
Right.
And so I think there may well be a future for unbranded brands or whatever that is, but when you reach that point where you need to break out of your niche, that's where it starts getting interesting.
Sure. Okay.
So you launched the white paper at Cannes.
Did, yes.
What else did you see that struck you over the course of the week on the
Apart from the
Riviera?
WARC billboard.
Apart from the immense WARC.
The immense WARC billboard, yes.
Which I'm sure everyone... We don't need to introduce it to our listeners.
No. Even the people... it was so big, even the people who weren't in Cannes will have seen it.
Well, everyone who's not at Cannes follows Cannes avidly, is one thing I've learned.
Yeah.
So what did I see that struck me? So I did some really nice interviews on the Cannes TV station, and the first one we did was with the guy behind Whopper Detour, which was obviously one of the big big winners last week. I thought it was absolutely fascinating.
The marketer or
example.
the ad?
It was the creative from FCB New York, a guy called Gabriel Schmidt.
Yeah.
And what I hadn't realised before I started looking into that interview was that they weren't even on the Burger King roster. I think they met him in Cannes. They met Fernando Machado in Cannes, and
Wow.
and
That's
had
a real ROI for Cannes.
and had a chat with him, and then followed up with an idea, and then it took about a year and a half to actually happen. Just an incredibly ambitious idea, and what I loved about it was not just the fact that the agency kind of pitched it to him, it's just the ambition of it. So for people who don't know about it, what they did was they geofenced every McDonald's in the US, and then they created an offer where they said, if you go to McDonald's with the Burger King app, you can then get a Whopper for one. You can get a coupon that gives you a Whopper for 1 cent. Yeah, it's just insanely ambitious, but also has a really strong business purpose. Which at a time when all QSR brands are trying to get people into mobile ordering, how do you actually get your app on people's phones and then get them to open it? Well, this is a fantastic example. So I loved it in that it was massively creative and quite a funny example of one brand trolling another, but actually had a real kind of business purpose underneath it.
That fast food sector is on fire as far as their marketing and advertising is concerned at the moment. Burger King, McDonald's, KFC, they're just doing really interesting, fast, creative, original work.
Yeah, there's a bit of a creative arms race in that sector. I think that sector went through a really tough few years, and they are obviously still challenged, but I think that the heat is elsewhere in many respects these days, and they've kind of almost they've spent several years talking a lot about trust, rebuilding trust in the food, in their supply chains, all that sort of thing, and I think now they're in a position where, while they're still doing a lot of that messaging, still need to do a lot of that messaging, they do have kind of carte blanche to do some other crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So apart from the the Burger King guy, talking about that piece of work. Was there anything else that really struck you at Cannes? How are the holding groups doing?
They were there.
But I mean, that is actually a change, right? Because they weren't all there in 2018. Right?
No,
Yeah,
they weren't.
well, yes. Yeah, they were there. WPP had a beach at one end, and
I saw it described as a lavish
beach.
It was quite glittery.
Did you go?
I
didn't-
looked at it.
Yeah, I didn't make it. I'm sorry to WPP, but they only sent me the invite like halfway through Cannes when I felt they probably needed to get their numbers up.
I mean, it's an interesting time for the holding groups, isn't it? I mean, because the people actually making a lot of the noise there were the consultancies, and I mean, we were all there on the Quasette. I mean, how many agency logos did you actually see on the walking?
I mean, you saw it was so weird. I thought this year because there were a lot of beaches from kind of ad tech companies and so on, and companies that perhaps were less well known compared to previous years when it was very agency led, and now it's holding group led, except perhaps Omnicom, which I think is still agency brand led.
Yeah, Omnicom tend to let their brands do the talking.
Yeah, and I think maybe because agencies can't compete with so you have the tech platforms. Facebook has a huge beach, and Google's got a massive beach, and there's a Twitter beach. Spotify has a beach as well, and I guess the individual brands can't compete, so they have to go in as a holding group, maybe.
I think we're going to see more of that.
compete.
I think we'll see IPG, Omnicom, Publicis following WP's lead this year. Because they can't, it's like budgets alone dictate that you can't really have much of a presence.
I'm sure IPG would agree that they are going to follow WPP's lead.
Maybe that would be differently phrased in the
Perhaps,
press release.
Yeah, perhaps.
But I mean, you can say Publicis are already trying to act as a unit, as a holding group. And if you look at where getting back to the consultancies, you didn't see Karmarama there. You saw Accenture Interactive.
Yeah, everywhere. I mean, that was the other thing. The management consultancies were very active, and they had a lot of yachts, I noticed.
Did you get any on any of the management
No,
consultancy yachts?
I walked past a couple. They had some great taglines. One of them was trust, creativity, empathy. That was PwC.
Did they have full stops between those words?
They did.
Wow.
Yeah, I felt very, stirred to action when I saw that.
Gotta love a tagline.
I really thought that was, stellar. There was another really great tagline I saw on a yacht. Is it metrics we can, spelled as can, metrics we can monetize.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just breathtaking,
Did it have
really.
monetize with a Z in it?
With a Z.
Oh my
I know, the
gosh.
horror.
No.
But-
It's like...
I know, but...
This is why we're not in advertising copywriting, Arun, which is why, we like writing things that are like several hundred words rather than 3 random words strung
Yeah,
together.
but metrics we can monetize. I can't remember who it was. Do you recall?
I can't remember. It was on a yacht. I remember it was on a yacht.
David's blocked it out.
Yeah.
David's being diplomatic. But yes, that was memorable.
So one thing I wanted to talk about Cannes is like we all said upstairs, it's like it never happened, and it was we all got back 3 or 4 days ago. For you, David? What's the impact of Cannes in the real world? Does it matter, any of the stuff that's discussed there?
Well, it should do. Yeah. I mean, I think it's very easy to get sniffy about a lot of the stuff that goes on at Cannes. And yes, you turn up and there is the 50th person talking about, in very waffly terms, about either brand purpose or
Social good.
Yeah, or yeah. So, but actually, what I was quite struck by was the number of sessions that were more
Functional.
Functional, yeah. There was more of a whole meal element to.
There was definitely some whole grain.
Yeah,
Wholesale, even.
Wholesale whole grain.
So-
Oh my God, we've come up with a tagline.
I thought there was quite a lot in there this year, actually. I think there were quite a few things where certainly the stuff we had on our own stage, which was
obviously,
which was more wholemeal than most, or whole grain or wholesale than that. Yeah. But yeah, people are actually talking about where the industry is going, where, for example, what everyone's talking about customer experience at the moment. So what does that actually mean for brands? How do you apply that? And I know from internally that the Cannes content team have tried very hard to get more case studies, more examples, more applications of creativity into the program than in previous years. I think they did a good job. And there were definitely fewer celebrities. I mean,
there weren't there?
Only John Legend was he the biggest?
I don't know, but celebrity? I missed him. I missed everybody.
He was in every session.
I missed every
John Legend session. There was a day
because
he flew in, and I think he was back to back. I mean, John Legend, I think, does a good job. He works hard.
He's a legend.
P&G, definitely. He's a legend. Thank you, Maja. P&G definitely get their money's worth out of him. I think I saw him in 2 sessions, including possibly one of my highlights of the week when he was interviewed by Michael Casson, who is CEO or founder of MediaLink, sister company now of WARC. So
indeed.
And it was an interesting conversation. It's the kind of thing I think that perhaps people watching from afar dislike about Cannes is a celebrity talking about marketing to no actual effect. Yeah. And people kind of wonder, well, what is this all about? And so this was I think I don't want to single out this particular conversation because there's many like them and many events like them, but I think that's probably where that kind of stuff is so disposable. That's what we forget really quickly. Yeah. And I think, like David said, there is some good stuff which is worth remembering.
I think
if only I could remember it.
I think there's some really good stuff at Cannes. I'm as cynical as you are about the whole thing yet.
I'd call it realistic rather than cynical.
5 years in. I think there's I think the kind of, we're slightly taking the mickey out of everyone talking about purpose and social good the whole time. But actually, I think there's a lot of good intentions there. And I don't know how you move from talking shop to actual change, but stuff like the Unstereotype Alliance, Brands for Good, all of that stuff that has sort of come out of Cannes, and it is shifting things.
It is definitely shifting things. I mean, you look at the representation of women in advertising now, and look, there's still a ton of work to be done, but it has started.
It has started.
And I don't think that would have happened without some of these types of forums that bring marketers together.
I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think this year what was noticeable was you mentioned the Stereotype Alliance, but things like Mars had this really interesting session where they produced done all sorts of internal research on representations of women in advertising. And set themselves benchmarks that they will now measure themselves against in the future, and that's great. And you're right that without I don't know whether without Cannes, but without just the industry talking about this for a sustained amount of time, nothing would actually have changed. So there is good stuff there.
And I think also the thing that the Mars CMO, her name escapes me for the moment, was at the IPG Women's Breakfast on the CMO panel there, and she was saying that regarding that bit of benchmarking work, we've been patting ourselves on the back for a long time, saying we're doing better than the average when the average is pretty rubbish, and admitting that it's not good enough and we are going to change things is a completely different narrative for the brands.
Yeah, and I mean on that note, we had a discussion with some in-house leaders during the week. One of whom was from Mars, Kimberly West, and she made what I thought was one of the more interesting comments of the week, where we were asking about purpose fatigue, because that is, it's an occupational hazard, I think, at Cannes or at any of these industry events, and she said brand activism is an antidote to purpose fatigue. So her solution to purpose fatigue wasn't to do less, but for brands to actually, I guess, focus on action rather than just rhetoric. But maybe Mars is an example of that. I mean, you may know more, but they won the Grand Prix for the SDG category, if I'm not mistaken. So it does seem like they are putting their money where their mouth is.
What other good case studies did you see, or award winners that really stuck out for you, David?
So obviously our focus is on strategy and effectiveness. I really liked the Grand Prix in both those categories. So the Volvo campaign that won the inaugural creative strategy line was just a really interesting. It was a combination of looking back to the brand's past and how I think Volvo had invented the 3-point seatbelt and given it away to the industry, and then so they kind of replicated that in the modern day by releasing all this data that into crash testing, which was a really kind of interesting initiative, very strong strategy, very strong thinking around it. And then in the creative effectiveness space, there was the Carrefour, I can't remember what they called now. But they were using all these seeds to create plants that were illegal under EU seed law, and it was all about kind of reviving ancient varieties of. I think what they did very well with it was take that kind of initial idea and then turn it into some kind of real world activation. So having pop-up areas in their stores and creating a label out of it, and kind of that was good for sales, but it also they kind of followed through in the case study to actual changing EU law, which is quite a interesting example on a.
Really? They could have just left the EU if they were unhappy with EU law. I mean,
well,
isn't that the only antidote?
It's so easy.
So easy, yeah.
Isn't that the only solution to?
But I think there's some really good in both the strategy and effective lines. There was some good, solid, again, wholemeal stuff, and then Whopper Detour, which I love. I'm sure that's going to be in creative effectiveness next year because the numbers from it are really, really impressive.
So what do you make of, you get these people every year who are like, Cannes has to go back to being about creativity, and the moment Cannes started going downhill is when they let the planners in.
Yeah. Well, those planners. So, look, I mean, I think the thing with Cannes now, and I'm speaking for myself here, is it's a reflection of the industry. It is there are several multiple things going on at Cannes. I think the festival in itself, the what goes on in the Palais, is still largely about creativity. They talk the language of creativity. They're looking at creativity. They've broadened the focus a bit to take in things like creative effectiveness and creative strategy, but largely they're talking about creativity and what it means to be creative and why that's important. You've then got the kind of secondary Cannes, which is all the stuff that goes on outside it, which is just a reflection of the industry in its entirety. And that's where the meetings are going on. I mean, it's a kind of the kind of trade show element. It's a very glamorous trade show, but it's the kind of trade show element.
Stretched, though. I mean, that was one of my big takeaways. Just the attendance at many events seemed to be thinner than usual.
Yeah, I would agree.
I mean, definitely more outside the Palais. But, because there's so much content programming going on.
Well, I think it's almost a victim of its own effectiveness, the Fringe. The Fringe is getting stronger and stronger. There are such good programmes outside the Palais. It's like, we couldn't choose what to go and see. It was really
there's
tough.
Like 5 options for every hour, it seems like.
Yeah, I mean, again, speaking for myself, but that seemed to change this year was the amount of, it used to be that there would be a beach that maybe would put on one thing in a day or 2 things in a day, and now they have an entire content program.
And they piggyback a lot on the speakers that are in the Palais, which I always find interesting because you end up with kind of the same group of people speaking at different events. And I mean, I don't expect you to respond on behalf of Cannes, but I would be annoyed if I was the Cannes Lions and you're investing all this time and money in getting these big name speakers into the Palais, and then they're doing like 5 other events.
Yeah, down at
outside.
the Pinterest beach.
Exactly.
Pop up on a little panel session down there.
Exactly. On whatever ad tech boat and so on. Although maybe not the ad tech boats, but yeah, I don't know. I think they should maybe work it into the contracts or get some sort of a exclusivity deal arranged.
You're right. I'm not going to comment on that.
Well, I actually, I feel for Cannes in that respect, because if it was our event, I would be a little annoyed if that was happening.
I think as you said, I think what everyone's kind of cottoned onto in the last 2-3 years is there is a huge opportunity in Cannes to talk about stuff and to put on content. And we're very lucky in that our content has a very specific audience, and so we've been able to actually keep our audiences growing. We've not had any kind of sense of audiences slackening off in our sessions. But you just look at the amount of content that is on with very similar people speaking on different sessions, and it's hard to it's actually hard to choose. When you've got you've got 6 different options for any one time slot. And
so moving on from Cannes, because the beaches are dismantled
moving on
now.
from Cannes?
I know.
Surely not.
Cannes dead to me now. It's over. What's your focus for this year with WARC? Any more big white papers or exciting stuff going on?
It's always exciting stuff going on.
Goes without saying.
So we'll spend the rest of the summer releasing follow-ups to Cannes. So we do an analysis of the creative effectiveness lines. So we'll look at that in a few weeks, and we do a big future strategy report that kind of builds on some of the work we did in the Palais last year. And then looking towards the back end of the year, we've got a big report we bring out towards the end of the year called the Marketer's Toolkit, which is a kind of trends focus on where money is going in the industry and how to be more effective.
Is that an annual thing? You've done that
Yes.
before. So what were the big findings last year? What are you expecting to change this year?
Oh, goodness. Well, so last year, I don't know, so long ago now. Last year we looked at, so the big things last year were...
Blockchain.
No, actually it wasn't blockchain. Yeah, we
At a guess. Was it blockchain?
One of the things, because our one is not based on... It's based on a survey of our audience, so it's not based on kind of us, sitting in a dark room and coming up with deep thoughts. It's based on actually, well, what are our audience telling us that they're doing? So and what you get out of that is you get near range trends. It's not where the industry is going to be in 5 years. It's, well, what do we actually care about in the next 12 months? And so last year, the big themes were customer experience, which is a huge focus for the client side and increasingly finding its way into the kind of agency side briefs. We looked at search, a lot more interest in search, because as search is diversifying, particularly with voice search, that's becoming more important. There's obviously the ongoing shift to video, rise of short formats, all that sorts of stuff.
Cool. Maja, what was your highlight from Cannes? Sorry to come back to Cannes, but...
I've left it. I've left
really
Cannes.
Big
so
sigh.
I really loved. I always say this. I love the IPG breakfast. It used to be called the Women's Breakfast. It's still all women speakers. It's always a highlight. It's 3 hours. We were just kind of immersed in everything from kind of stand-up comedy, from some Latina comic to the big CMO panels to really inspiring stuff. They had the obituary, like really random stuff you see at Cannes. Like they had the obituaries editor of the New York Times there this year.
Because that's a big issue, isn't it?
Talking about her project, where she realised that something like, I think 28% of all obits they'd ever written were women, and there were people of colour from all sorts of achievements who'd never been mentioned in the obits column. So she's got this project to fill in the gaps, basically, to write the obituaries and commission the obituaries of those who were never covered in the New York Times. So that's what I love about Cannes, is that you'll just come up against a completely brand new bit of information. It might be tangential to marketing and advertising and PR.
Well, if so much the better.
But I think that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
I think it's good that you can
agree.
just go in there and kind of soak up all this stuff that is at the intersection of media and consumers and brands, and it's you come away with it always inspired, even if it's by something you never thought you would kind of pay.
Yeah, and that's
pay
well
attention.
attended, isn't it? I mean, that remains really well attended.
Yeah, it was
does
packed
It's
out.
packed.
Yeah,
So,
I had to literally flash my press pass and say, "Do you not know who I am?"
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that's fine. It's fine. I got in, obviously.
Okay. Good. Wow.
So,
impressive.
We've been on a bit of a tour today, from the ivory, if
It's
not
been a journey.
rosé-tinted towers of Cannes to the dark rooms of marketing intelligence. David, thank you very much for joining us on the
Pleasure.
podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You've been listening to The Echo Chamber. Brought to you by The Holmes Report and produced by Marketeers. Sponsored by the Bullet Group, putting you in tomorrow's conversations today.